Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 10 waiver wire targets for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, talking about players at a variety of different positions, the best available wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, quarterbacks, kickers, and team defenses. Because again, going into Week 10, we have 4 teams on bye: the Browns, the Packers, the Raiders, and the Seahawks. So we will not have those players available for our starting lineups. Therefore, we're going to have to hit the waiver wire in order to recoup some value, because not only are we going to be missing those players going into this week, injuries continue to pile up every single Sunday. Week 9 was not kind to us in any sort of fashion. Over the course of Week 9, we saw injuries to players like Drake London, Chris Olave, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, again, which earlier before this video was recorded, information was revealed that it's going to be a multiple week injury, if not even more significant time. AJ Brown, Keon Coleman, other wide receivers going down with injuries. Therefore, we're going to talk about these players on an individual basis. I'll share with you guys my thought process and opinions, and share statistics regarding these players as to why you should prioritize them as such going into the future of the 2024 season. Again, before we get into today's video, if you guys have not yet already, be sure to travel down to the description. While you're down there, you can find timestamps if you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player. Also, every single day on the channel, I live stream later tonight after the Monday Night Football game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Kansas City Chiefs. I will be live streaming here on the channel. If you have any questions, be sure to swing on by. So subscribe, click the bell notification button. Thank you very much. And at the end of today's video, I will be putting together an Underdog entry going into tonight's game. Again, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog, there's a link down in the description. When you sign up today using code Andrew, making that first time deposit, a minimum of $10, not only will you get the first time deposit offer, not only will you be able to tail the upcoming picks, of course, our hidden gems picks went ahead and hit, luckily, this last week, but you'll also be able to get my rankings every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings, including flex. So if you guys are interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. If, in fact, you are not eligible at this current moment in time based on your location, or if you've signed up in the past with my code or somebody else's code, you can always check out Patreon, where you can find all this content and much more, rankings, etc. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin by talking about the wide receiver conversation with Chargers wide receiver Quentin Johnston, who just recently returned from injury. Many of your league mates may have dropped him because of the injuries, time that he had spent not playing for this organization. Now, in his absence, obviously, we saw a lot of production from guys like Will Dissly, of course, Ladd McConkey stepping up in a greater role. Josh Palmer had returned and gotten himself healthy. And even though Ladd McConkey and Josh Palmer, Will Dissly a little bit, is still relevant within this offense, Quentin Johnston returned against the Cleveland Browns yesterday, had himself a great performance, 4 catches for 118 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown for 20 fantasy points. Pretty much picked up where he left off, in which he was putting up great performances deep down the field, which is exactly where they want to utilize him within this offense. Now, when we take into account that he's currently only rostered in 15% of Yahoo leagues, 27% of sleeper leagues, he should be available in the vast majority of leagues going forward. And considering where this offense for the Chargers has been trending as of late, we're talking about prior to the bye week, the Los Angeles Chargers on average were throwing the ball 23 times per game. Since after the bye week, they've been throwing the ball 33 times per game, 10 plus on average. Therefore, Quentin Johnston should be exposed to even more opportunity going forward, as Justin Herbert has played incredibly well. Back-to-back games of over 275 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and has a great opportunity this week of taking on a defense like the Tennessee Titans that have been dealing with a lot of injuries within their secondary. Moving on to our number 2. We have XAVIER Legette, who is expected, very similar to Quentin Johnston, to be the number 1 outside receiver of this offense going forward. Again, since the Deontay Johnson trade to the Baltimore Ravens, XAVIER Legette got himself an even bigger boost of overall opportunity going forward. Then, there have been rumors over the course of the last couple weeks that Adam Thielen will eventually be traded. Obviously, the trade deadline is tomorrow afternoon, November 5th, at around 4 p.m. EST. Therefore, if we're going to be in a situation in which Adam Thielen is traded, XAVIer Legette's going to have himself even more value going forward, coming off of back-to-back weeks of double-digit fantasy points, having scored a touchdown with Bryce Young in both of those overall games. As long as Bryce Young continues to feel comfortable throwing the ball in his direction, this young combo is going to continue to find success for the remainder of the season as the number 1 receiving option of the Carolina Panthers offense. Currently only rostered in 27% of leagues on Yahoo, 48% on Sleeper. Again, should be rostered immediately. Should have been rostered all these weeks. I think I've mentioned XAVIer Legette for maybe 5 consecutive weeks now. Should be on roster going forward. All right, our number 3, we have Demarcus Robinson, the thumbnail of today's episode, wide receiver of the Los Angeles Rams. Now, going forward, we're not going to see games in which every single time out, Puka Nacua is going to find himself getting ejected. But Demarcus Robinson, regardless of Puka Nacua active or inactive, has been relevant for fantasy purposes, even going back to last season within this Rams offense with a full healthy Matthew Stafford. Now, when we look at his most recent performance yesterday against the Seattle Seahawks, an incredible game, 9 targets, 6 catches, 94 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, 24 fantasy points. You may be thinking, well, that's a one-time option, Andrew. Well, honestly, it isn't. The week prior had also scored 2 receiving touchdowns. So he has scored 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games, has put up over 40 fantasy points in those 2 games, and continues to be fantasy relevant. And even though we're going to have a full healthy Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua eventually, even last season from weeks 13 through 17, with a full healthy Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, he was averaging 13.34 fantasy points per game last season, averaging 6.8 targets, 4.2 receptions, 64 receiving yards, and had scored 4 touchdowns in the final 5 games of the 2023 season with Matthew Stafford and the starters. Therefore, going forward, a player that is only rostered in 12% of Yahoo leagues, 20% of sleeper leagues, should give him a shot if in fact you need a wide receiver going forward. Number 4, we have Jalen Tolbert. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of injuries that took place within the Dallas Cowboys offense this past weekend. Against the Atlanta Falcons, of course, they had sustained injuries from guys like CeeDee Lamb with his shoulder, and of course, Dak Prescott with his hamstring. We did get information that Dak Prescott is going to miss multiple weeks, but we don't know the exact, overall situation with CeeDee Lamb. If in fact Dak Prescott's going to be shut down, and of course, the backup quarterback's going to be in, CeeDee Lamb may take some time off himself because, again, this team is not trending towards making the playoffs. Therefore, if Jalen Tolbert is going to be asked to be the number 1 primary option within this offense, again, caught a pass from Cooper Rush yesterday with the backup quarterback, if in fact we're going to continue to be relevant in this overall capacity, and he is going to be the number 1 option, currently only rostered in 23% of Yahoo leagues, 36% of sleeper leagues, could give us a lot of variable upside for those of you who are going to be missing players at the wide receiver position due to overall injuries sustained this past weekend. Not only that, again, the Dallas Cowboys are going to be in negative game scripts for the majority of games. So going forward, we're still going to find ourselves throwing the ball a bunch and hopefully looking in the direction of Jalen Tolbert. Then we move on to Elijah Moore, who, even though the Cleveland Browns are going on a bye week, again, he has had himself 12 and 9 targets in the last 2 games with a starting Jameis Winston. And even though Jameis Winston on Sunday at home against the Los Angeles Chargers looked like the Jameis Winston of old, throwing interception after interception, the opportunity share is continuing to go in the direction of Elijah Moore. He's averaging 10 targets per game plus with Jameis Winston. Therefore, going forward, he is still going to be a potential impact player for fantasy purposes after they return from the bye week. Again, if in fact you are in need of a wide receiver this week, this would not be the answer. But for future purposes, Elijah Moore definitely going to be of value considering the opportunity share that continues to go in his direction on a weekly basis. The final option within the top 6 is Brandin Cooks. Now, obviously, Brandin Cooks has been on the injured reserve for quite a while. He should be able to return this upcoming week. He is eligible to return. Therefore, if in fact the organization does have him activated, understand that with the potential absence of Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, Cooper Rush would be looking in the direction of Jalen Tolbert, Brandin Cooks, Jake Ferguson. Those would be the primary receiving options, so he could get himself a lot of value. Now, the other reason I wanted to mention Brandin Cooks is because if in fact the Dallas Cowboys are trending in the wrong direction, who's to say that a team doesn't come out and trade for Brandin Cooks? I understand that he is a older receiver, but he's a veteran and he could certainly get the job done still to this day. So if there's a possibility in which he could be traded in the coming hours, this is a potential option that you could pick up before tomorrow's trade deadline and see if anything clicks within that overall conversation. Now, speaking of players who could potentially be traded, let's talk about our number 7 and our number 8, Adam Thielen and Mike Williams. Again, these are 2 names that have been rumored over the course of the last couple weeks as potential trading options who could in fact be on the trading block this upcoming Tuesday afternoon. So if in fact Adam Thielen or Mike Williams were to change homes, going from the Carolina Panthers and the New York Jets to a team that of course is in desperate need of them, we have heard a lot over the course of the last couple weeks in regards to the Steelers looking for a wide receiver. One of these 2 options could be the answer. We're going to have to wait and see as to whether or not they're traded. And if in fact they are not, of course, Mike Williams is not rosterable, but Adam Thielen could certainly be of value, even if in fact he stays with the Carolina Panthers as a primary receiving option for Bryce Young like he was majority of last season. Then we have our number 9, Nick Westbrook-IKHINE. Nick Westbrook has been ridiculous. Coming off of a week in which he had 6 targets, 5 catches, a receiving touchdown, 50 receiving yards with, of course, Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph has actually been pretty relevant as of late, but Nick Westbrook-IKHINE has scored a receiving touchdown in 4 consecutive games. I thought every single week, okay, well, he scored 1 touchdown. It's not going to be a big deal. He won't do it again. And then he did it again. And he's done it again. And for an entire month has scored a touchdown every single game. So as long as he's going to be of value in this kind of circumstance, I have to mention him because he could be of service for a team in a deep league with potentially like a 14-team or 16-team league, which needs a wide receiver. Then we talk about Parker Washington. Again, in the absence of Christian Kirk, it's no surprise that we have Evan Ingram getting 10 targets. That's what I'm talking about. But outside of that, of course, Parker Washington, BTJ would be the next man up within the overall roster. Then we have Mason Tipton. Again, due to the injury to Chris Olave sustaining another concussion, he could be sent to the injured reserve. His season may be over. We're going to have to wait and see what exactly the entire situation is regarding that. But of course, Bub Means is also on the injured reserve. So Mason Tipton is the next man up outside of Cedric Wilson within this offense, within the receiving core. Then we move on to Ray McLeod. If, in fact, Drake London's hip pointer is going to be more serious than originally expected, of course, we would anticipate that Ray McLeod could step up, of course, scored a touchdown in his absence yesterday, and have himself a lot of fantasy success when given a fair share of opportunity within this overall scheme. All right, let's move on to the running back conversation, beginning with Jaylen Warren. Again, this is a player that I've talked about every single week over the course of the last month, I would say. Jaylen Warren, someone that over the course of the last 2 weeks, while healthy, has been able to get himself 14 and 11 touches. And even though those 2 games have led to him only scoring 6.9 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format, again, he is still highly relevant because he is getting double-digit touches on a weekly basis. He is still a high-valued handcuff because if, in fact, anything was to happen to Najee Harris, he would be immediately the starter and be able to recoup all that value and then some, get himself probably 20 touches per game in the absence of Najee Harris. But even in the presence of Harris, still getting himself a great workload, could always find himself even more upside within a touchdown conversation. We'll have to wait and see if he's capable of accomplishing that. Obviously, coming off of the bye week, should be fresh and ready to go. The next player I wanted to talk about is TYJAE Spears. As of right now, currently rostered in 44% of Sleeper and Yahoo leagues. The fact of the matter is, Tony Pollard and his body is kind of falling apart. They have ran him into the ground, and even though he still looked good on Sunday against the New England Patriots, the offensive coordinator has already come out and said that, we ran Tony Pollard into the ground. We need to get another running back in the mix in order to find, a little bit of balance within this backfield. That will be found via TYJAE Spears. If, in fact, he is available, he will certainly be a low-end RB3 for the remainder of the year in the opportunities that he is given. Then we move on to our number 3, Isaac Guerendo, the backup of Christian McCaffrey. Like I've mentioned over the course of the last week, and I will once again kind of harp on this conversation, in regards to Jordan Mason versus Isaac Guerendo, I prefer Isaac Guerendo for the remainder of the year. Jordan Mason has a shoulder injury that over the course of 2 of the last 3 games, he has unfortunately re-aggravated said injury and had to leave the game and has not returned due to those injuries. That makes Jordan Mason as the primary handcuff of Christian McCaffrey unreliable. If we were going to be in a situation in which Christian McCaffrey was not to play this week, even though he is trending to play in week 10, if in fact he wasn't able to do so, Isaac Guerendo would actually be the preferred running back to take over for, of course, the absence of Christian McCaffrey once again. He's played incredibly well with the opportunities that he has been given, and of course he is healthy, which is the most important factor of being a handcuff in this overall conversation. Number 4 is Ray Davis, who, again, since becoming the full-time backup running back and taking over the RB2 job within the Bills' overall offense behind, of course, James Cook, but ahead of Ty Johnson, since taking over that job. From week 7 through 9, he's been able to get himself 6 touches in each of those 3 games, minimum. Therefore, you would think, okay, well, 6 touches isn't enough, but in 2 of the last 3 weeks has scored a touchdown. He has had himself over 10 fantasy points in week 7 and in week 9. So as long as he's going to continue to be relevant in this kind of capacity, again, it's always going to be kind of implicated to be a low-end RB3 within the overall conversation. Then we move on to our number 5, AUDRIC ESTIME, who again, over the course of the last 2 weeks, we have seen multiple reports regarding Sean Payton wanting to get him more and more utilization going forward. Of course, Javonte Williams still on his rookie deal, but Javonte Williams hasn't made any sort of progress within the running game, has certainly been a valuable receiving option within the offense, but on the ground has not been sustainable enough and efficient enough in the opportunities given, while AUDRIC ESTIME is averaging over 6 yards per carry this season. So pretty crazy numbers going forward, if in fact available, which he is in vast majority of leagues, 1% rostered on Yahoo, 5% rostered on Sleeper. If you've got a pretty deep bench, you could go ahead and roster him and see if anything is to come into fruition in regards to him taking over the job in Denver in the coming weeks. Then we move on to our number 6, KHALIL Herbert, a name that many of you guys have thrown in my direction over the course of the last couple live streams regarding, Andrew, should we be picking him up in order to prepare just in case he is traded? Again, he hasn't played within the offense for quite a while. He has been inactive. And if in fact we're going to be in a situation in which, of course, a backfield needs a running back, a trade could be made, considering, of course, KHALIL Herbert is currently on his rookie deal. So it makes it far more affordable for a team to go and trade for him based on overall pick compensation and, of course, the monetary compensation within the overall conversation. Currently only rostered in 7% of leagues on Yahoo and 9% of leagues on Sleeper, could be available for your league to potentially pick up. If he doesn't get traded, of course, he's an insta drop afterward. And then we have another player, Miles Sanders. Again, with Jonathan Brooks coming back this week, it will be the Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard show. Therefore, Miles Sanders going forward, again, could be a tradable option, could end up moving homes this week. If the Carolina Panthers continue to move guys like Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, and now Miles Sanders, it would not be a surprise in the coming days. All right, let's move on to the tight end conversation. Our top 3 here should already be rostered. Based on rostership percentages, Hunter Henry and Taysom Hill, both rostered in over 30% of leagues on Sleeper and Yahoo. But Mike Gesicki was, of course, our hidden gem, and boy, did he not stay hidden. He had himself an incredible week. But let's go ahead and let's begin with Hunter Henry. Again, coming off another incredible performance in the last 3 games in which he has played with a healthy Drake May. 11.6 fantasy points half PPR, 13.2, and 9.1. He puts up great performances. Each of the last 2 games have consisted of 7 or more receptions, 8 or more targets. The numbers are continuing to rack up in the direction of Hunter Henry, the primary receiving option of this offense. Of course, going forward, this week they take on the Chicago Bears. We have most recently seen tight ends against the Chicago Bears. Jacksonville, 11 catches for 113. Washington, 8 for 97. And most recently, the Arizona Cardinals tight ends, 5 catches for 69 and a rushing touchdown. Then we move on to Taysom Hill, who's coming off of the best week in terms of his overall usage. 5 total rushing attempts for 19 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, then 5 total targets for 4 receptions and 41 receiving yards. Again, numbers that we haven't seen in quite a while from Taysom Hill, because again, he typically doesn't get himself receiving utilization. But this upcoming week, they take on the Atlanta Falcons. Back in week 4 against the Atlanta Falcons, prior to his injury, Taysom Hill, 6 attempts for 24 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, could very easily have himself another great performance here within the week, especially considering Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams are both dealing with injuries. It is just the Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara show out of this backfield. Then we move on to Mike Gesicki, again, a player that we had as a hidden gem, and boy, was he incredible. 24.5 fantasy points, 5 receptions for 100 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. He's going to continue to be a mainstay and relevant option, even in the return of T. Higgins, because Eric All Jr., the rookie tight end that they drafted, who continues to see himself more and more opportunity every week, unfortunately tore his ACL yesterday. So Mike Gesicki in line to get himself more opportunity going forward. And if in fact T. Higgins is going to continue to miss time, of course we know that Mike Gesicki continues to be fantasy relevant in his absence. We move on to JOHNNU Smith, our number 4. Again, JOHNNU Smith coming off another solid performance. 6 targets, 5 catches, 46, 7.1 fantasy points. This week they take on the LA Rams, which again is an advantageous matchup we have most recently seen. Green Bay tight ends, 4 catches, 88, 2 touchdowns. Las Vegas tight ends against the Los Angeles Rams, 12 catches for 112. And of course, we've had the Minnesota Vikings tight ends, 3 catches for 40 and a touchdown. They're a pretty advantageous matchup in the overall conversation. Then I move on to Ja'Tavion Sanders, a rookie tight end for the Carolina Panthers that is currently rostered in 1% of Yahoo leagues, 6% of sleeper leagues. Again, in week 6, 7 targets, 5 catches, 49, 7.4 fantasy points. Week 7 with Andy Dalton, 6 catches on 6 targets, 61 yards, 9.1 fantasy points. Then in week 8, with Bryce Young returning against the Denver Broncos, disappeared. But back again in week 9 to be fantasy relevant with his best fantasy performance of the season, with 5 targets, 4 catches, 87, and 10.7 fantasy points. As long as he continues to get himself more and more opportunity, while this, of course, Carolina Panthers offense continues to trade away their pieces, he's going to continue to be a fantasy relevant option going forward at the tight end position in a deeper league. Then we also move on to THEO Johnson, another rookie tight end that, again, is going to continue to get himself more and more exposure to opportunity every single week. Down in the red zone, the New York Giants have really begun to implement far more usage of their tight ends, which, of course, granted THEO Johnson a touchdown this most recent week. As long as he's going to continue to get opportunities this upcoming week in an away game, taking on the Carolina Panthers, Daniel Jones up to the task on hand, and THEO Johnson should follow suit because, again, the matchup against the Carolina Panthers is one of the most advantageous at the position. Then speaking of Daniel Jones and the quarterback position, let's go ahead and let's talk about our top 6 quarterbacks available. Now, again, Aaron Rodgers and Justin Herbert, both of these players rostered in over 43% of leagues in both Yahoo and Sleeper. So if in fact we're in a situation in which they are available, you should go ahead and potentially pick them up if you are losing your quarterback this week due to a bye week. But again, Aaron Rodgers, 6 of the last 8 games, 2 or more passing touchdowns. The offense at times looks like the best in the league. At times it looks like the worst in the league. And because of that, there's going to be a lot of volatility, but he has been consistent in his overall play as of late. They took on the Arizona Cardinals, which again, isn't the most advantageous matchup based on recent performances, only giving up 1 passing touchdown in the last 3 games as a defense. But Aaron Rodgers should be able to take advantage of the overall opportunity considering the talent that surrounds him. Then we move on to Justin Herbert, that, like I mentioned earlier, in regards to the overall usage within this offense, from weeks 1 through 4 prior to the bye week, Justin Herbert was throwing the ball 23 times per game on average. And since returning from the bye week, averaging 33 passing attempts per game. This offense is continuing to air it out. Justin Herbert back-to-back weeks with 275 or more passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns minimum. Takes on the Tennessee Titans, which again, their secondary is dealing with a lot of injuries. And the Chargers defense is playing so incredibly well, causing turnovers that is going to give more and more opportunity to Justin Herbert to find success. Then we move on to Daniel Jones, who again is coming off an incredible performance, currently only rostered in 10% of Yahoo leagues, 17% of sleeper leagues. Again, he was 20 of 26 passing against the Washington Commanders, 2 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown, 54 rushing yards on 7 overall attempts. So going forward against the Carolina Panthers, an away game, which again, Daniel Jones' overall upside continues to increase when he is away from home, continues to play significantly better in that overall circumstance. Again, it's an advantageous matchup. They can't stop the run, nor can they stop the pass. The expectation is that Daniel Jones should find success within the upcoming performance. Then we move on to Bo Nix, who again only sits at number 4, primarily because he takes on the Chiefs this upcoming week. Outside of that, over the course of the last 5 games for fantasy purposes, in a 4-point per passing touchdown league, is averaging 20.88 fantasy points per game in the last 5 weeks. Therefore, he should be a still relevant option for the remainder of the fantasy football season. But going into the matchup against the Chiefs, we'll see how Baker does tonight and as to whether or not we can trust Bo Nix in the upcoming performance. Then we have Russell Wilson coming off the bye week, prepared, ready to go. They're taking on the Washington Commanders this week. Daniel Jones just went for 2 passing touchdowns, 20 for 26 passing, a rushing touchdown with 50 plus rushing yards. Russell Wilson should also be able to find himself success, even the last 2 fantasy performances, 24.9, 13.8. I think he'll begin to find himself in the middle, being like a 16 to 17 point quarterback rest of season. Then we move on to the final quarterback option, Derek Carr. Earlier today, the Saints fired their head coach because of their 6-game losing streak. And because of this, it is going to give the team a boost and a potential boost of fantasy production within the upcoming performance, because that typically is what happens. Once a coach is fired, the team plays significantly better for the interim head coach. And in this overall circumstance, taking on the Atlanta Falcons, of course, Derek Carr could be asked to do a lot. In the absence of Olave, it's going to be difficult. But again, if you are desperate enough, could be an available option that you could pick up and play within the upcoming matchup. All right, let's move on to kickers and defenses. We begin with Matt Gay, the kicker of the Indianapolis Colts. Again, I don't know why he is still rostered in so few of leagues. 7% off Sleeper, 13% Yahoo. From weeks 4 through 9, averaging 9.7 fantasy points per game. He has made 2 or more field goals in 6 straight games. Again, he is an automatic play on Underdog every single weekend in terms of entries. Then we move on to Jake Moody. If Jake Moody was 100% guaranteed to return this week, I would have him as my number 1. Again, from weeks 1 through 5 was averaging 11.6 fantasy points per game. But also don't forget that the kickers that have replaced Jake Moody have also played incredibly well. Wright had 13 points when he played. Carlson in the 2 games that he has played, 8 and 16 points. So again, the kicking game for the San Francisco 49ers, highly valuable. Jake Moody should probably be the number 1 if in fact he is an absolute, without a doubt, return this upcoming week. I don't want you to waste your waiver if in fact he's not going to play this upcoming week. Then we move on to Chad Ryland, who again has pretty much kind of secured his spot to be the kicker of the future for the Arizona Cardinals. So again, going forward, taking over for Matt Prater, who is dealing with an injury, currently only rostered in 2% of Yahoo leagues, 3% of Sleeper leagues. He's a kicker who's had himself over 10 fantasy points in 3 of the last 5 games and has made 2 or more field goals in 4 of the last 5 games. Then we move on to the defense conversation, and I begin with the New York Giants because they do take on the Carolina Panthers. Again, it is an advantageous matchup regardless of the situation. As long as Bryce Young is playing quarterback, the Giants should be implicated to have himself a solid week. Then we move on to the Falcons, who again take on the New Orleans Saints, who are dealing with a plethora of injuries, just fired their head coach, who again is a defensive-minded head coach. I don't know if that's going to improve their defense, but again, the Atlanta Falcons have played incredibly well as late and should be able to continue their streak this upcoming week against the New Orleans Saints. Last time out, the Falcons had themselves 17 fantasy points as a defense, taking on the New Orleans Saints. A lot of special teams plays that led to touchdowns. Then we move on to the New England Patriots. They take on the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams, dealing with a little bit of an injury, obviously was limping off the field last time we saw against the Arizona Cardinals, was sacked a plethora of times. The fact of the matter is the Chicago Bears, over the course of the last 2 weeks, they've been beat up as an offense and they haven't really scored much. Therefore, if the New England Patriots could take advantage of that, they could be a solid overall defense within the upcoming performance. Okay, so that covers our waiver wire prospects for week 10 that we could potentially pick up going into the week and hopefully help us this week, but also further beyond. Outside of that, let's go ahead and close out today's episode in regards to a potential Underdog entry regarding these 4 players. So I've gone ahead and I've put in these 4 players. Now, obviously, one of these players is not even implicated in tonight's game between the Kansas City Chiefs and, of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have Austin Reeves going higher than 2.5 first quarter points. He has accomplished this every single game this season. Every single game he has been able to accomplish this. That's why I think it's an automatic. He typically takes 1 3-pointer every first quarter and at least takes 2 or 3 shots, typically implicated to be a bucket. Austin Reeves has done me a lot of favors as of late regarding the NBA season in regards to overall Underdog entries. That's why I want to share it with you guys. Then we have Cade Otton going higher than 3.5 receptions. Again, double-digit targets the last 2 weeks. I'm expecting those to continue to go in his direction to at least lead to 4 receptions minimum. Rashad White has had himself 3 or more receptions in every single game this season. The only 2 games in which he didn't is because they were blowing out the opposition, and again, didn't need to get himself much utilization in that overall conversation, but otherwise has been able to accomplish it, and if I'm not mistaken, 5 of the last 7 games that he has played. Then we have Travis Kelce. 4.5 receptions should be a cakewalk. Again, it is Travis Kelce of all players. If we're not implicated to see 5 receptions for Travis Kelce tonight, I think the game may be cooked, and it may be a boring overall experience, but either way, I'll be back after tonight's game, via live stream. So if you guys are interested, be sure to swing on by, ask questions going into week 10. Again, don't forget, let me just pop this up on screen real quick. So for those of you who have asked me, Andrew, how do you get the numbers to where they're currently at? Like 4.5 receptions for Travis Kelce isn't offered for me. Well, if you travel over to the website, it says 5.5, but if you click on the arrow next to the number, you can go ahead and adjust the line to 4.5 receptions and take higher or lower on it. Or you could potentially increase the line to like 7.5 and then pick lower, higher, etc. And you get higher multis or lower multis depending on the overall circumstance. So that's how I go ahead and adjust the lines in order to make sure that it is more favorable for me in the overall conversation. For example, Rashad White, 2.5 receptions, etc. Okay, hopefully this helps. Again, I'll be back later tonight in regards to the overall live stream. Outside of that, thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, tomorrow talking about running backs. I'll see you guys. Peace.